One of the techniques that photographers use to get around the problem of limited dynamic range is to take more than one photograph and do what's called bracketing the shots. Bracketing the shot is when you expose or you set your meter for a different part of the image. For example, let's have a look on the left-hand side. This is your typical picture, and what we've looked for here is to get the exposure set for these buildings and the water. Notice the bridge. You can see the details in those parts of the image. Those are properly exposed. However, if you look at the sky, it's a little bit blown out. Perhaps you have lots of pictures like this in your portfolio. Let's have a look on the right. Here's the same shot, but with the exposure time changed. And this time we've underexposed it a little bit. We actually set our exposure for the sky. And notice we've got this powerful, dramatic, cloudy sky. But now if you look down into the bridge, we've lost the detail there. We've lost a lot of the detail. You can't really make out what's going on in these darker areas. Now typically you would have to take one photograph or the other and make a compromise. In this case, we're going to be able to blend both of these together. And what we're going to do is we're going to fake a technique known as using a split neutral density filter. A split neutral density filter is employed a lot by landscape photographers who are always facing dark foregrounds and bright skies. And what this does is it's like a little gradient that goes over the top, and the top part's tinted, almost like sunglasses, and then there's a gradient somewhere where it gently goes into clear, and that way you're getting a darker exposure on the sky while getting a lighter exposure on the foreground. And in this way, just like putting sunglasses on, but just over the top of the image, we can capture all the detail in the dark areas while still having enough exposure to open up all the details in the foreground. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fake that effect in Photoshop right now. With our two photographs, we're just going to open up the layers palette here. And what we want to do is combine the two. So we're going to take this one photograph on the right, drag it on top of the one on the left, creating another layer. So let's hold down the Shift key and we'll drag across. Now the reason I held down the Shift key is because this kept it inside the middle of the photograph. If I hadn't held the Shift key, I'd have to reposition the photograph later. And notice what we have now is we have an image with two layers. Here's the layer we just dragged on top. If I hide it, you can see underneath, there's the original. Let's close the second document. We don't need that right now. And now if you want to do this effect, just remember, take your photograph, and then when you take your second photograph where you're exposing for your shadows, if you have a tripod, use a tripod. If not, then hold the camera as still as you possibly can. Perhaps lean it against a tree or a wall or something like that. Or just take your pictures very carefully while holding it still. Now let's have a look at this second one here. If we turn this layer on and off, notice I haven't used a tripod. There's a little bit of movement. Look, for example, the top of these buildings. See how there's a little bit of movement. Things jump around a bit. Well, we need to align these. Fortunately, in Photoshop CS3, there's a new feature that helps us with this. So what we're going to do is hold down the Shift key and the Layers palette, click on the background till we have both layers selected. Now, we go under Edit, and we're going to go Auto Align Layers. Click on Auto Align Layers, and then for projection, just use Auto, and then click OK. Now Photoshop's going to think a little bit. It's aligning these, it's looking at the images, examining them, and then it's going to move the top image around a little bit so it aligns. Look at that, it's actually been shrunk a little bit. So let's hide the top layer now, and notice if you look at those buildings, there's no movement. Those are perfectly aligned now. That's great, that's our first step. If you have these little edges around here, don't worry about that because you can crop the image later on. Now what we're going to do is we want to turn off these layers because right now we have two of them selected. Just click somewhere in an empty part of the layers palette and notice that turns off the selection. Now click once again on the top layer because we only want to work on the top layer. Now we're going to simulate our split neutral density filter. If you notice, the skies are perfectly exposed, but it's too dark down below. So we want to use the photograph from underneath. Let's turn off the top layer again. This is the photograph we want to use for the bottom part of the image. And then we just want to apply this top image just to the top so we can see the sky. So we're going to create a layer mask. Go down, click on the layer mask, and notice that layer mask now is attached to the layer that we've been working on. Click on the layer mask just in case, and you'll see up here it says mask 8, meaning that the layer mask is selected and not the layer. Now, to simulate the split neutral density filter, or the graduated neutral density filter is another name, we're going to create a gradient. Grab the gradient tool. Now we want to hit the D key, and that will reset the foreground and the background colors. In this case, it's already white for foreground, black for background, but the D key will reset that. Let's go up to our top options here. Make sure that we've got the first option on the left selected, foreground to background, and the linear option. Make sure the mode is at normal and opacity set to 100. Now, typically these are all the default options. So now what we're going to do is white is actually going to keep the contents of that layer visible, and any areas of black are going to hide that. So we're going to start, say, here where the sky ends, then hold down the Shift key to constrain a straight line, drag it down into those buildings, maybe to the top of the bridge, and then release. And now if you look at the photograph, you can see what's happened. We now have the top showing through. There's the original photograph underneath, and now we've just added the top part here, which shows the sky. Now this, you can see the gradient. If you look carefully, you can see the gradient through the building. So this is not exactly ideal, but this is exactly how a neutral density, a split neutral density filter will work. So you can see that idea. In the next lesson, though, we're going to go into layer masks, where we're going to learn how to have a little bit more control over this.